Thank you. Thank you very much, James. I think Mary has set a very good context with saying that we need to really look at the narratives, and changing the narratives would be really important. Well, 2015 may just be the milestone year for the changing dynamics and the changing narratives, as I would put it. And I'm really going to talk about the India story and share what we are doing in India to move the needle on sustainable development front. So if you look at the India story, we all know that we are not insulated from climate extremities. And the reality is that food, energy, and water security challenges are rising and creating socio-economic inequalities. As a rather developing nation, India would now therefore need to strike a balance really between profitable growth and inclusive sustainable development. And in addition, over the next 5 years, look at the world's biggest financing challenges that the country would face. Ending financial untouchability or including 100 million families. This is not just opening bank accounts, but actually giving access to finance. Bringing affordable and reliable supplies of clean water and energy to all of its 1.3 billion inhabitants, and investing in enterprises that will provide livelihoods for an extra 10 million job seekers each year, which means the Indian financial system would really have to stretch to meet these aspirations. The government, the private players, especially banks, therefore, have to really proactively engage on climate action, being central players in an economy. And I would like to share what is happening in India currently. If you look at from an advocacy front, renewable energy is assuming a lot of importance. And recently, the Ministry of Renewable Energy called in for commitments from the private sector and state governments, where the target that the government has taken is about 175 gigawatts by 2022. And the commitments that came to the table were 266 gigawatts of clean energy. We as a bank and in partnership with the ministry work to mobilize 45 of our own clients to bring these commitments to the table. However, the challenge remains that once that the commitments are there, the potential roadblocks in really realizing these challenges is the key. So 4 areas come up here really. One is, how do you carve out separate sectoral limits for renewable sector to ease the funding? Second is including, so we have something called the priority sector lending in India, where 40% of the balance sheet of every bank has to go to certain backward sectors. So how do you actually include renewable energy as a part of the PSL, that's the priority sector lending, thus pushing banks to proactively look at this sector? Third is waivers of single or group borrower limits would further incentivize private players. So under the Basel III norms, the banks have to take certain limits, borrower limits. And the fourth is establishment of sovereign green funds, so public finance as well as multilateral finance to aid the overall financing along with private finance. I think that's a very important point here. Towards cleaner emissions overall, it would be important that all stakeholders integrate environment, social, and governance parameters into their operations, as well as banks in their lending decisions, because that will ensure that the carbon emissions are mitigated to a large degree. And on ministries and multilateral front, for example, INDC. So there is a consultative process that has started within India where private sector consultations would come up, where all of us would come to the table to at least talk about what should go into the INDCs and make these as opportunities, as Mary mentioned. And the last is, how do the private sector actually work on certain areas where research can culminate into policy advocacy. So we've been doing that a large part at the bank. Here I would just like to talk about the action part of it. So as the 4th largest private sector bank in the country, we recently launched India's first green infrastructure bond, and this was launched for 80 million USD plus a green shoe, but we closed the bond at 160 million USD. The bond will particularly focus on solar, wind, cities, biomass, small hydropower projects, and the bank has also taken a target of green energy financing of 5,000 megawatts for the next 4 years. So that's, again, one more proactive approach that we are really looking at. From a risk analysis framework, ESG is a board-approved policy at the bank, where the framework is where we are actually monitoring our clients' operations between tranches. This enables us to mitigate our own risk, and this is well embedded within our credit risk policy at the bank. What we are also doing is we have a lack of level playing field because there are only 2 banks in India which have a proper ESG framework. And therefore, we are representing to the central bank as well as the Ministry of Finance to have Indian guidelines for responsible finances. If you look at Brazil, South Africa, Colombia, the central banks have put together an country standards for all banks or financial institutions to follow. Innovation is a very important aspect here, and this is really from a resilience standpoint, I would say. How do you actually innovate on products and services that are looking at bottom of the pyramid, and also these newer techniques, to fund newer techniques. So another area is we are working on a $5 million USD guarantee, a risk guarantee, on the back of which we could lend to those sectors where the credit risks are higher. I would like to highlight one of the community engagement initiatives that we have, again from a resilience perspective. Every month, with 600 branches across the country, we mobilize communities within the bank branches, post-banking hours, to talk on relevant local environment and social issues, which are very local. We get the municipalities also to have these discussions and solve these problems. So, we at the bank believe that ensuring long-term business success by contributing to economic, social development, a healthy environment, and a stable society is the role that all private sector needs to play today. And you can't just concentrate on pure profit or pure philanthropy. Responsible banking is the ethos that cuts across the bank, where in a way we are the conscience keepers of the bank, the hardcore bankers who sit there, who want to give out those loans and constantly talk to them about positive impact of portfolios and assets. There are 3 key parameters that we focus on as a bank, and we propagate this within the BFSI sector in India. One is proactive investments for environment and social outcomes. Second is innovative solutions for the bottom of the pyramid. And the third is really internalizing sustainability through your own standards, management standards that one needs to put in place. I think I just want to give you 2 quick examples. I have spoken about the renewable energy. We funded one of Asia's largest solar PV project with a capacity of 151 megawatts. This is the largest project in Asia. This would supply electricity to 624,000 households and offset 216 tons of CO2 emissions. Very interesting thing that we've seen and we've partnered with the company to do is the solar panels come in cartons. These are wooden boxes. So, and they were normally thrown out and just disposed of. So we said local NGOs to partner and make school benches and desks out of these solar cartons. And now today in the government schools or in the bottom of the pyramid schools, these are being used, thus providing dignity to those children who would otherwise sit on the floor. So, they feel happy to come to school because there's a bench and a desk that they can sit on. So these are very important points to be taken into consideration. One interesting innovation that we have done about a year back, a robust domestic remittance service which helps migrants hassle-free transfers beyond banking hours. So in India, to transfer money from cities into villages, particularly for migrants, is very difficult because of lack of residential proof. So they would take a long time for this money to go back to their cities. So we innovated on our back end on the regular NEFT, the RTGS that we all do. And today, within 15 seconds, the amount lands into destination accounts with this. There's one more where we work with farmers, which is the Kisan Dairy Plus. So India is world's largest milk producer, accounting for 17% of the global milk production. And the farmer whose livelihood is based on this suffers on account of the credit cycle. So sometimes it takes anywhere between 15 days to a month, or sometimes they don't even get the money. So how do you actually break this credit cycle? So we worked with the dairy company there. And as soon as today the farmer pours the milk, it's tested. the money lands into his destination account. So there's a message that goes from the dairy server to our server, and it lands into the farmer's account, thus providing that cash in hand kind of a thing for really the dairy farmer. We're the only bank in the country, in India today, to have an ISO 14001 certification. And this helps us mitigate our own risks at the from a carbon emission perspective. This year, we're looking towards carbon neutrality. How do you, sorry? Yes. So, I really believe that this whole new order demands not only disruptive innovations, but also replicable business models that would guide private sector towards the new normal. So how do you actually move and internalize sustainable development would be the key. And at the same time, a very interesting point, an important point that Mary said, it is about reviewing from where you're going. So, whatever you adopt really is what you would start today. But how are you going to map that? How are you going to actually monitor that would be very important. So from a world perspective, internalizing the whole externalities, incentivizing. So, while we have a carbon tax, can we have a carbon tax, can we have a carbon holiday? So those, in India, for example, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency has certain caps on carbon, and you can't cross those emissions. But if I have actually remained at that threshold, then can business get some kind of an incentive? Then that really incentivizes, or beyond. It's not about putting pressure to stop what you are doing, but actually how do you use cleaner technologies, better mechanisms to be able to bring in that balance between growth and sustainable development. And the last point that I would really like to make is speedy action on all the kind of funds that we've launched, for example. So we have a National Adaptation Fund or the Green Climate Fund that is there. How do you actually deploy that fund? How does that money actually come out so that it can be used for the purpose that it has been put together? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. So, Namita, you've been involved in a number of UNEP Finance Initiative, a number of enterprises to pull together best practice in the finance community. Your bank's won lots of awards, lots of sustainability awards. I've judged a couple. And so you're in a decent position to promote these ideas. But at the same time, the political conditions have changed in India, mostly in a positive way for renewables. But at the same time, there's still a substantial commitment still to coal. How do you navigate that difficult territory as a financial institution with the principles you've got so that you can continue to deploy capital and assist clients in the clean energy sector whilst you know there's also big demand for more investment in coal?
So I would say that, I think one has to run parallel to what is really happening in the country today. At least we have a government which has a development focus, which has, the kind of commitments that the government is taking on the renewable front. Or, for example, the union budget that was released in February focused on considering certain aspects of social. So there are certain funds that were put aside for development. There were certain funds that have been put aside for entrepreneurs, for example, to bud. I think what we've been doing is, I believe that, the task is uphill, but you have to keep at it. So there is a lot of representation and in a positive way that we keep making with the government. So it has taken us 3 years for the Ministry of Finance to today look at some kind of Indian guidelines for responsible businesses. So it's all about, keeping at it and making those representations, I would say.
Wonderful. We'll have a chance to have more questions later, specifically in this sector, but we're going to move on. Thank you very much, Namita.